Hello, welcome back to the studio. Well, the canvas is in place, but what are we doing this week? Well, the theme of this week's painting is black, or rather not black. In fact, I'm going to be mixing up my own black colours. I don't know what that means, but apparently it means something like black. Because I found that not using black actually has improved my paintings immensely, and it's very easy just to reach out and pick up a tube of black paint. But I think a far better idea is if we can mix our own. Now, the reason why this is becoming more and more important as you paint more and more is because you want to advance your own paintings. You want them to look more sophisticated. And learning how to mix your own dark colours, well, that gives you a great advantage. So, let's have a look at the reference photograph, which I'm going to put up on screen now. The reason why I'm doing that is because my little printer just doesn't do it justice. You can see a lovely bright sky and a fabulous silhouette of a tree painted in black. I'll do that again. Black. So let's get on with things. So here's my canvas, 16 by 20, and it's painted with a coating of grey gesso, light grey, and that's completely dry. I'm not going to use a white canvas because I don't want my painting to look too luminous. This grey colour is a mid-grey colour and it tends to give you a nice harmonious background. I've done my best to print off that reference photograph, and it's as close as my little printer can print it. I might bring up the real version in the corner here occasionally, but essentially we're looking for a beautiful background sky. Now, you don't have to be a slave to this painting, this photograph. If you've got a different background sky combination you want to use, that's absolutely fine, because this week we're really talking about combinations of colours that make black, which is obviously the main feature of this one, which is the silhouette. So let's get on with painting a background sky. And if ever there was a reference photograph that says use the Bob Ross wet on wet technique, then this is it. So let's paint some background sky colours and we'll see what we've got on our palette. So here's my colours. I'm going to be using titanium white, phthalo blue and alizarin crimson, red, Indian yellow, cad yellow and this colour, turquoise. It's actually from the Bob Ross flower range of paints. I think it would go nice in my sky, so why not add something extra. To prepare my canvas for wet on wet paintings, I need to use something like this, Bob Ross liquid white oil paint. It means I can actually blend colours on my canvas over and over and over. If I paint straight onto a dry canvas, well, all the colours get stuck very quickly and it becomes hard to move them. With a little touch of the liquid white on there, it means I can get nice soft edges and I can get a really beautifully blended sky. So a thin coat of this is what I'm looking for next. For ease of application, I keep a small amount of liquid white in an airtight pot. I can store this in the freezer, and instead of my paint drying out, well, it just goes sort of chilled and a bit stiffened like ice cream. I just bring it back up to room temperature and it's perfectly usable again. It never dries out. This is a great way of storing all of your oil paints. To apply the liquid white, I'm going to use one of these. This is a very old and very worn Bob Ross landscape brush. Perfect for applying a thin, even coat. And I start off by just putting out just a few dabs across my canvas, and sometimes I find it easier just to divide my canvas into four and do one section at a time. And as you see, I'm really scrubbing this into the canvas nice and thin. If you haven't seen me do this step before, you know it's important that we don't over apply this. If our painting gets too wet, too much liquid white on it, then all the colours become really soggy and hard to blend. They all just run into each other too easily. And if we don't have quite enough on there, well, the opposite is true. Nothing wants to move at all. And the easiest way of testing our canvas is to use our fingertips. I take my hand, I touch it to the canvas, and I might touch in 2 or 3 places. Firm pressure, and I want to be able to see some fingerprints. You see here, where I touched, there just wasn't quite enough. It was just a bit sort of thin. But if I touch on too much, it looks like I really have dipped my finger in some ice cream. So we're looking for this, a thin even coat, but use reasonably firm pressure when you're testing. if you only touch gently, it can give you kind of a false idea of how much you've got on there. So firm pressure, and you still want to see your fingerprints. I'll get on and cover the entire canvas with liquid white. So that's my canvas covered. I like to finish off with some nice long flat strokes just to even out the surface, make sure there are no really wet spots or any really dry spots. And of course, it's important that we do one more test to make sure it's not overly wet. Again, firm pressure, give it a nice push. I'm going to do all four corners, use my thumb in the center. And once again, I got these nice clear fingerprints. If there was not enough on there and it looked a bit too much like that, well, I might want to add a tiny drop more. Okay, let's get on with adding some colour. One last thing, before I move on to adding colour, I want to use this brush again. I want to get rid of the liquid white. So I want to take it off my brush onto a piece of paper towel. And while I'm here, I might also mention that people often ask me, if you're going to paint this canvas with liquid white, why don't you just start with a white canvas in the first place? Why bother with grey? Well, as you see, it's a piece of white tissue, and you can see that this painting is still going to be painted on a pale grey background. It's a very thin coating of liquid white, so it gives me a much more harmonious painting. Right, on to those colours. If we have a little look at our reference photograph, and I'll bring it up here in the corner, the question will be, where do I start? You see, there's all these lovely colours on here. There's a blue background colour, there's a pale blue on the left, but there's also yellow, golden and orange colours on here. Well, there's a good chance that if we got them in the wrong order, we'd end up with some blue right up against the yellow. And blue and yellow makes bright green, and there's not much green in this painting. So we have to be a little bit careful. And in this instance, those lovely orangey yellow streaks are separated from some of the blue streaks by a touch of lavender. So maybe we should mix up a lavender colour first. In fact, there's quite a bit of lavender in this painting already. To make a nice lavender colour, I'm going to combine phthalo blue and alizarin crimson. I'm going to use my palette knife and take quite a nice little blob of it, and far less of the phthalo blue. We want probably about 1 part of blue to about 4 or 5 parts of crimson, and I'm going to really mix this well. As you see, adding little bits more of that phthalo blue colour, I slowly turn my colour into this lovely lavender colour. But go easy with the blue. If you add a little touch too much, this colour tends to go completely the wrong way. It ends up being far too blue. In fact, I think I'm probably flirting with a bit of danger here, because I know if I put some yellow colour near this, it might not actually stay sort of a nice bronzy colour. It might even go slightly more green. So I might just put a little tiny touch more crimson back in again. But I think that's going to be a nice colour for my background sky. And the other colour we need to mix up is some orange. Just wipe off my palette knife, and for this I'm going to need Indian yellow and a touch of red, and mix it up with the same amount of care as you did with the lavender. How about that for some lovely vibrant colours? Lavender and a lovely orange colour. I think it's time we put some of this colour onto our painting. And I think I'm going to start way off in the background in here. It's just above this horizon line of trees. I'm going to go in with some of that blue colour. I'm going to keep it to the right hand side. The middle section is dominated by my tree. There's a little bit of a gap here for my silhouette in the distance. Maybe that looks like some treetops. So yeah, a little bit of blue through here. And phthalo blue is a really powerful blue colour, so I'm just going to edge that onto my brush. Just the smallest amount of colour, just a tiddly bit. I'd really rather start with this far more sort of pale blue than strong dark blue colour. Remember, about halfway I'm going to have a tree. It doesn't matter, I got a little bit of lavender on my brush. It doesn't matter. And as always, I encourage you to paint a little, stand back. Paint a little more, then stand back a little more. Maybe a touch more, maybe even a touch of white into it. Just give myself a slightly more soft blue colour. Yeah, look at that. Titanium white, phthalo blue. Look at that. That's a pretty colour, isn't it? Now, next colour on here, I want a little bit of lavender. There's a few little touches of lavender through here, a little streak of lavender through there. I think I'm okay to carry on with this brush. Again, this is quite a strong colour, so I'm going to use it straight onto that dirty brush. And I think I will just take a little bit of that through there. Yeah, maybe a little touch more. Now, there, don't want to call my blue colours off. I think just above it there's a really brilliant orange patch through there. I think there's some nice lavender through there. I'm just going to map this out. There's another little tiny piece of that orangey colour through there. There's some of that colour through there as well. Yeah, that's it. Blue, orange. This is where you can get lost, folks. You make 3 or 4 squiggles. Okay, let's start with that one. That one is definitely going to be lavender through there. There's a nice band of orange, then a band of purple through there. Okay, I think I got it back under control suddenly. But sometimes it's quite easy just to sort of lose position when you're painting away, and you kind of just, you look away from your reference photograph and you suddenly think, where am I? I've changed position by mistake. I kind of like that. See how that kind of happened? Scrub these colours in here and just let the brush do the work for you. You can create some amazing effects here without really trying. Yeah, I think that's quite good. I'll stand back the other side of the studio and see what I think of it. I'm happy enough with the rough positions of these colours on here. They're in the right position as far as this painting goes. Now, I learned from experience that sometimes you do need to try and get some of the bright colours on there a little earlier in the painting. Again, the experience I have is that suddenly this kind of creeps down. You end up with kind of almost no space for any colours. So I've got a fresh, clean, dry brush here. I'm going to go for some of that brilliant orange colour. I'm going to get that into my painting sooner rather than later. It gives you kind of a better idea of how your painting is progressing. There's a lovely band of this colour right through here. As I say, I'm going to be very careful. If I start seeing green come through here, then I'm going to have to be a little careful. I think it's kind of nice in there. Just kind of press that in and push it in. I think that's looking good. And as you do this, you start to see other little colours. There's a beautiful warm reddish colour through here, which is actually quite useful because that red colour won't be affected by the lavender. Let's get a little more red. Wow, look at that. As I say, I'm not going to be a slave to my reference photograph too much. I'm going to just try and work it together, make something nice for a background. Again, I'm using the flat of the brush. I'm just kind of letting the paint sort of break across the canvas. we do that, we kind of start creating these lovely effects. I want that to be really bright. Now this blue colour here looks really out of place, doesn't it? It looks really almost too bright, and it might need toning down a bit. And I haven't even started to get into my turquoise colours. Maybe I'll put a little bit of that on next. But before that, of course, I want to stand back. After a quick stand back and look at my painting, I think this is working out quite well. Well, it's going to work out great because I'm going to put a tree on top of it, so it's looking good from that point of view, but I really want to blend this now. And I have a choice of brushes here. Now, I could just use a clean, dry Bob Ross landscape brush, make sure it's a fairly newish one with some soft bristles. And Bob also made some blender brushes. Now, these were predominantly used for the floral painting classes, but he made them with lovely soft bristles. But if you don't have something like this, then some people use some of the really soft makeup brushes, and you can buy them very cheaply online, and they're like big round mop brushes, and something like that can work quite well. So I think I might have a go with this. And once again, I'm just going to go really carefully at this. I don't want to go moving my paint around too much. I'm going to have a piece of paper towel to clean my brushes off. I think I'm just going to work just in these sort of yellowy areas first. And again, just gentle flicks. The idea is just want to move the paint a little bit. We just want to blend it. We don't really want to have to repaint it all. So you see I'm picking up a little colour. And same on here, a little bit of soft blending just with the tips of the brush, and I'm using little crisscrosses. Okay. I think what I'll do is I'll move my camera around to the side a little. Okay, there we go. Quick dry clean of the brush. And if I start picking up colours and I start getting things happening on my canvas which I don't want, I will stop and dry clean my brush again. And I'm going to try not to overwork my painting. It's very easy to lose some amazing detail just by trying a little too hard to get too much out of your painting at this stage. So just a light swish. There we go. See, I've got some really lovely colours coming through here. Flirting with the edge of that blue colour. Checking I don't get green. Well, if I get a little green, that's okay. Almost looks like I've got that turquoise colour on there. When I've been painting and people have commented after the videos have aired, they've said that you put out a lot of little bits of colour and you still end up with loads of it left on your palette. And that's right, I don't cover my paintings with tons and tons of paint unless I need to, unless I'm doing a mount, in which case I want it a little heavier. But when I'm doing these background skies, I don't use too much paint. I found if I do, when it comes to doing these sorts of blends, everything just moves a little too quickly. You see here, I can do that, I can blend, but I can leave all of this amazing detail in my painting. And the other reason why I can do that is because there's not too much liquid white on there. And again, I know that some people struggle with just overdoing it with the liquid white, just putting on a fraction too much, and then they get into a pickle. Their paintings get away from them and everything turns to mush. Stand back and I'll have a look at that. Maybe I'll come back in here and add in a few little touches more of colour. Maybe I won't. Okay, had a good stand back. I think I might try and use a little bit of cadmium yellow on a fan brush. I want to just drop in a slightly brighter zone. Again, titanium white, touch of cad yellow. And this colour is a cool yellow colour. All these colours are warm reds and warm yellows, so this will really stand out brightly. See, look at that. It really zings, doesn't it? want a little bit more bright red over there. While I've got this colour on my brush, here's a choice colour, isn't it? Yellow, cad yellow. What do you reckon? What colour do you reckon I'm going to get? Something fun? Yeah, you might be surprised actually. It does produce quite a dullish red colour. Look at that. That's not particularly bright and fun, is it? That red colour, Bob Ross red, is actually quite a dark colour. It's got quite a lot of black through it, and when it hits that yellow colour, it produces this sort of miserable, sort of brick colour. More like an orangey sort of colour, but got a little bit of an orangey pink tone to it. It might work out. Let's put some of that through there, see if it works out, and see if it looks fun. Yeah, I think we'll just put some of that on there. There, let's do a bit more blending. I think I want just a slightly darker top line through there as well. How that changed the dynamics, just darkening up those corners. Really pulls your eye down from the top, pulls your eye down into the centre of your painting a little bit more. So the question is, how much more of this do I do? Bearing in mind, it's the tree that's the feature. Well, I think I could be close to finished. No turquoise. Oh well, never mind. Maybe next time. So that's my background sky completed. Now back to the theme of this week's video, which is black. In fact, not using a tube of black paint, but mixing our own. Now, there are many combinations and many ways of mixing black, and just a few of them I'll flash up on screen. One of the most common ones really is using an ultramarine blue and some dark sienna. You'll see that little combination used everywhere, but there are many others, and they can be found actually back on the colour wheel again. In actual fact, if you use complementary colours, in other words red and green, that produces black. In fact, if you use violet and yellow, another complementary colour, you'll find that produces a version of black as well. In fact, nearly every single complementary colour, the one opposite, will produce a colour which is deemed to be a black. The other combinations of colours is red, blue and yellow. If you add the three primaries together, you'll get a version of black. So I thought maybe I should mix up and make a colour wheel to show you what I'm going to do. So let's get mixing some colours, and we'll make up some most common versions of black that I can find. I went through my paint box and pulled out all the colours that I have. I think you should try doing this yourself. So let's mix some colour. A few weeks ago I made this little colour wheel. I used sap green as my sort of main colour, and then I mixed in all the other colours around it to see what variations I could get. And this I keep to hand because it gives me some real good clues as to when I'm mixing up colours. So I thought, let's make up a chart and see if I can make up a sort of a variation on that, and I'll be mixing up some different versions of black. I've got a little drop of odourless thinners in a dish and a small round brush. Let's mix up the first one, red, blue and some yellow. And I'm going to take cad yellow, just a little bit, a little touch of red and a little touch of blue. There's a little touch hiding there. And we're going to mix these together and see what we get. And we see that we very quickly start to make quite a dark colour. Now, if you want to make an absolute darkest colour you can, you'll have to play with these colours backwards and forwards a little bit. A bit more yellow, and we get a greenish tone. A little bit more red, or a bit more blue, and we start heading towards that direction. So you have to spend a few minutes blending these colours. as you see, it doesn't take long before you end up with a very dark colour. I think that could be called a black. Let's take a little drop and put it on my little colour chart here. And it's black, but as I say, it has a bit of a tint to it. In this case, it looks like I've gone a little bit heavier with some of the blue colours here. And it also got a little bit of a greenish tone to it. Now, I'll put these other colours in a minute, but the other interesting thing you can try to do is to add a little drop of white to it. And this will give you a clue as to how much of a tone you've got. As I suggested, that with a little bit of white added to it, this colour looks a little bit on the green side. Let's add a little bit more of that colour back in. You see, I can vary that colour a little bit. It's almost like a very dark grey. So that's that colour mixed with a touch of white. Time to give my brush a little bit of a wash. As you see, I filled in all of these little combinations of red, green, blue and orange, purple and yellow. I'll mix up the colours and then I'll add a little touch of white, and then we'll see what colours do we really get when we mix with a lighter tone. And I'm going to do a little bit of time lapse to this to save you sitting there watching it over and over and over. So, get started. And my final two colours, dark sienna and some ultramarine blue. And for the sake of a fair comparison, I've actually got two black colours, ivory black and lamp black. And I'm going to take a little sample of each and put those out on my little chart. First, this is the ivory black. I should get them in the right order. And I'll give that little touch of white. And the other colour, lamp black, is a very, very dense black colour. And I don't know if you can see that, but that's got a brownish tint to it. And that is a very dense black colour. If you're wondering how the paints got their names, the clue is in the fact that that ivory black was originally made by charring ivory in a fire and then grinding it to make black. And lamp black was originally made with the soot from oil lamps. As you see, it gives a very dense, heavy grey. So there we have it, a full range of different blacks from different mixtures. I'll zoom out a touch to get the top line in. There. So you can see many ways to create blacks and many different varieties and shades of black too. So which one would you choose to do and use in our painting? I'm not sure, but one of my favourites is purple and yellow. But there's a trick. So, did you figure it out yet? How did I trick you with my little colour chart? Well, it couldn't be the last two, ivory black and lamp black, because they were pre-mixed and they came out of a tube. So you know these values are as intended. But these values here, that's where the trick comes in, I'm afraid. You see, I mixed those three colours together and got this combination of greeny colours with a bit of a blackish tint. And yet these combinations gave different values at the end. The trick is that all of these colours contain these three colours. I chose to use the same colours that were on my palette. In other words, the red and green, I just mixed the blue and yellow together and made a green colour. So this combination contains those three. But it provided a different blend, a different mixture. Same here, this orange colour, I just mixed red and yellow together and put some of the blue from there with it. So this combination is exactly the same as that combination. You can see they look very similar. When I blend them together, they produce a different value. But one of the most reliable ways of making a nice black colour is to make a purple first and then add some yellow to it. And that's the technique I often use. Now, why do these colours all come out differently and yet they are all made from the same three colours? And the answer really is down to the mixing value. Mixing black or a very dark colour is incredibly tricky. A tiny bit more of one or the other and the colour goes completely off. The only combination of colours that I ever managed to mix a reliable black colour from is lavender and a touch of yellow. Now, the other reason why I might choose to use these colours to make a dark with as opposed to these is that all of these colours came from the palette that I used to make the painting. Now, if you look at any of my other little tutorials, I often advise you not to suddenly introduce a new colour, a fresh colour sort of towards the sort of middle end of a painting that stands out and really kind of like takes your eye. It's not terribly harmonious. And that could be true of using these colours, the ivory black, there's a brownish tint to it that doesn't appear in the background, and lamp black, super strong, it would really kind of stand out and might be just too strong for my painting. So my advice is try and mix a colour from something that's already in your painting. You'll find it fits in much better. And lastly, black. Black has the habit of saturating other colours. If you put a tiny drop of black with a bit of green to make a dark green, very often what you end up with is black with a hint of green, and it's not really green with a hint of black. Black likes to devour other colours. It swallows them up whole. So I tend to like to mix colours and vary my values. It gives me that little bit more control and makes my paintings look a little more refined. Anyway, less blabbing from me and more about painting the tree. So let's have a look at our reference photograph again. I'll bring it up here in the corner of my painting. And as you can see, we have a really lovely tree shape here. Fantastic. Notice those downward hanging branches at the sides, which are much older. And as we go up the tree, of course, the branches start to look a little more upright and outward to the sides. It's a classic tree shape. But where should we position it on our painting? In the photograph, of course, you see it's absolutely dead centre. But should we move it offside, left or right? Well, the choice is yours, but as this is a painting that features the tree as the overwhelming sort of feature, then I'm going to put it exactly where the photographer has it in this photograph, right slap bang in the middle. First of all, let's start creating a lovely black colour for the base here. This looks like a nice distant forest, maybe in the distance, and you can just see the tops of some little trees. And then we want this lovely strong black colour for the tree. And as I mentioned, I make my own black using this lavender colour, which, if you remember, we made it with some alizarin crimson and some phthalo blue. So that's a good local colour. And I'm going to start taking little touches of cadmium yellow. And I'm going to mix it in. And almost immediately you see our lavender colour wants to turn black. And as I mentioned in that little bit of chat, making a lavender colour first and then adding a touch of yellow to it, for me, has always produced the most reliable black colour. I find I can get it almost right every single time. And because the lavender colour is quite a strong colour, the phthalo blue and alizarin crimson are both really powerful colours, it means that the weakest colour of the three is cadmium yellow, which means I can sort of add that sort of fairly roughly. I don't have to be overly concerned about how much I put in. I can put in a little bit more or a little bit less. So you see, that way of mixing up can get you a really lovely, reliable black colour. To help my paint flow a little more easily, I'm going to use some of this refined linseed oil. Bob would often use some thinners to do his, which was indeed a nice way of working, and it would work lovely with this background, but tends to dry quite quickly. Maybe an advantage in a film studio, but I want slow drying paints. Just a couple of drops off to one side. And I like to soak my brushes, particularly if I'm going to be doing fine work, because they tend to, as you see, they tend to be a little bit sort of straw-like when they've been sat and dried out for a little while. And again, this is a neat little trick, is to soak your natural bristle brushes in something like linseed oil before you use them, and give them a good sort of 10 or 15 minute soaking time. It really helps the little fibres, the little hairs, to become supple. I often find people just pick these up out of a drawer and go straight into the paint, and they like painting with a piece of straw. It's sort of hard and unyielding, and they complain that the brush is no good. They say, oh, they use the terrible liner brushes, and I usually say, you know, how would you imagine being woken up out of bed and being asked to drive 1,000 miles? You need a cup of tea or a cup of coffee before you start the journey. And it's the same is true with brushes. They like to be woken up gently. A nice oil bath is what I think they need. And I do this also with synthetic brushes. And I know that they're synthetic and they shouldn't make a difference, but somehow they all seem to respond a little better if you give them a little dip in some oil first. So I give my brushes a nice oiling before I start trying to apply paint. Let's plan this out a little bit. So here's my synthetic brush, got a little tiny drop of linseed oil in it. I'm going to go back into my handmade lavender colour with yellow to make a nice blackish tone. There we go. And what I want to do first is obviously get the position for the tree, and it's pretty much bang on centre, isn't it? So let's put a little mark down here. Well, incidentally, this is your bravery test, folks. There's no going back once you start this stage. And I want to sort of take some of the bottom edge here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on just a few little markers so that I don't run out of push. I don't kind of push too high with it. And they don't have to be level. And I say, don't be a slave to your reference photograph too much. And I also want to know where the outer edges of my tree are going to be. So how high should we go? Well, if again, we look at the reference photograph, we see it goes just sort of out through the top of this red. So let's put a little mark there, dead center. And we know it spreads across to the side. Okay, we want to make sure we don't go too far over. So again, put a little mark there, maybe a little mark there. And you see they hang quite low to the ground, so a little mark there. And again, I'm just measuring this by eye. I think I'm going to come to over to there. And it goes out quite a good distance here. It's not exactly perfectly symmetrical, is it? And by just doing this, it kind of gives me a bit of a circle to work to. And we don't have to be perfectly round. We can move things in and out a little bit. But just by starting with these dots, it really helps me to see the proportion of the size of the tree. Now, if something doesn't quite work out and you put a dot in the wrong place, well, it doesn't matter. I could turn it into a crow. Or better still, I could just rub it out and turn it into the background. Incidentally, you can't do that so easy when you're painting on yellow, but you see, by just putting out a few dips and dots and things, it kind of gives you a clue, and you're not quite so sort of shooting in the dark with it. Now this tree I'm going to actually use as quite a nice example. It's got two main trunks running up the centre here. So let's do that. Let's add a couple of nice... Again, hold my brush like a stick, and it kind of comes up through the centre. And I want another big one over to here. Yeah, I'm holding my breath for this one because this is a nice painting and I don't want to make a mess of it. And I've got a little branch kind of coming over to here. I've got another branch kind of coming up over to here. And that's about sort of half, just under halfway. Again, just a touch. And they've got some nice branches coming out into here. I've got a nice branch here. Well, that branch branches twice, doesn't it? So we're going to do that. So you see, by just gently holding my brush and just mapping things out, just holding my, there you go, and these branches got a lovely sort of dip to them. Well, they've got a nice kind of swooping job, haven't they? Kind of swoop down and up. They've got quite a nice strong centre piece to it through there. You'll notice as I go back over this a couple of times, so my colours darken up a little bit. But this isn't a wholly black tree, is it? It's got a little bit of a kind of a cast to it. It's not jet black. It's got a sort of a slightly sort of murky look to it. It's not that dense, heavy lamp black colour. So I actually don't mind if my colour bleeds through a little bit. Once again, it's all about painting something believable that looks like it's harmonious, that works together, rather than being something that looks like it's been sort of stuck on top, like an AI painting photograph or a superimposed. I don't want that to look like that in my painting. Now, let's do a little bit of time lapse. So I'm going to start filling things in a little bit more. In that last little sequence, you saw how I started to flesh out the shape of my tree. I went from bigger branches, medium, and then smaller branches, but I didn't go too far. I just sort of extended out. I did a little section at a time, and then once I've done this side, I'll move to the other side. And that way I work progressively around my tree, sort of growing it as I go. I'm always very careful not to just sort of put in anything too heavy at this stage. Lots of these little marks here are more of a suggestion as to where I might put the branches, as indeed those little dots on the outside also give me a clue. And this is why I think people sometimes get maybe a little bit carried away, or they kind of make mistakes and they paint something just a little bit too heavy. They put in one really heavy tree trunk, one really heavy branch, and then they fight to sort of get the tree back in balance again. And I know I've done that myself, so take it from me, doing what I did there, just starting off with just some little general marks, just generally spacing things out, and then just slowly increasing the position of things and changing the shape, really helps make this a sort of a nice sort of tree to paint. And also a quick word about branches, that branches that are the oldest ones tend to be lower down and they tend to spread out maybe just a fraction further. And the branches tend to grow more and more upright as they get to the crown of the tree. And you'll see this on lots and lots of trees, how that the lower branches hang out a little further. Basically, they're a giant solar energy farm, and they're trying to get as much energy into the tree as possible. And by having their branches arranged in layers, well, Mother Nature has figured it out far better than we have. So make sure you position your branches that mimic the real tree. Whilst we're talking about branches, let's have a look at a couple of different branch shapes which, well, maybe aren't always helpful. I've got plenty of oil on my palette, so I might run a little bit. And one of the tree branch shapes I often see is what I call the pitchfork tree. Now, you will see branches like this in nature. In fact, just outside the studio, we have a dogwood that grows exactly like this, and they have these very sort of pitchfork type branches on, and they look a little odd to me without foliage on. And if you have a whole tree covered with these little pitchforks everywhere, it doesn't always look great, even though they are there in Mother Nature. And the other thing you'll sometimes see, which I call the alien hand tree, and it's where a central branch branches off in 4 or 5 directions, all from one point, and it kind of looks like a chicken's foot or a hand. These sorts of branches, again, they do exist in nature, but they never look quite right in a painting. So take note of this when you're doing your own paintings. I've switched brushes now. I've moved from the little flat brush and I've gone down to my liner brush. Remember, I had this soaking with a little drop of oil on it to soften it up. And now I've kind of gotten to this stage, I'm going to start looking at adding some next sort of size down branches. And again, painting with just the very tip of the brush. The last stage, the very outer stage, I'm going to do that with another brush. And I'll show you that a little bit later on. Notice I did a few branches there. I took them down into the main branch, make sure they join on okay. If you've got a steady hand, you can start on the outside and touch and then drag in. But if not, and you find yourself with a slightly wobbly hand, then start on the trunk where it's a little bit thicker. As you go out, then branch off. You might find that easier to go along the main branch and then off. Notice also how I hold my brush well back down the handle. This is something I teach a lot. If you hold it back, you can wiggle with your fingertips. You can make some really lovely lumpy, bumpy branches. If you hold it down here, then it's kind of hard. You've got to kind of move your whole hand to do it. And it's not quite so nice, I don't think. So, just one of those things I like to do. Once again, I'm building up the shape of my tree. I'm going from sort of slightly more outside to more upright branches. And again, you can come back in here and you can firm these up. There we go. So you see, this is going to take me quite some time to do. So a little bit more time lapse, but I really want to make a lovely job of this tree, so I'm not going to rush it. So here's my painting so far, and I'm really pleased with my tree. I'm pleased I used black colour, which is harmonious with the rest of the colours in the painting. But I want to advance my tree one more stage, and for that I'm going to be using some nice worn out brushes. You see, I actually don't like these really sort of sharp stubby ends on my branches. I want something a little bit more refined. Sit tight and see how we can take our painting to the next level. Now, I want to refine my tree one more stage because I'm not so sure that I like these sort of sharp, stubby ends where the branches finish. When you look at some trees, and I'll try and find a reference photograph for you, you notice that they have a sort of, almost like a halo of sort of small twigs, or twiglets maybe, right at the very end of the branch where the leaf used to grow, and it produces this sort of lovely, sort of almost like a shield effect over the top, like a nice sort of edge to it. And I want that for my painting. And to do it, I'm going to use an old brush. Now I've got three really old brushes. This really old fan brush, another little old fan brush, and a fan brush which I reshaped. And I'm going to try one of these to get the effect going. When I've done this in the past, the one thing I do know is that I don't want really oily, wet paint. And this is pretty oily and wet. I want my paint to be fairly dry. So I'm going to take a little drop of my black that I mixed up. Ooh, that's dried out. I'm going to try and literally turn my brush into something like that, which is far more sort of dry. So I want just the sort of smallest speckling effect. And so I'm going to use this old fan brush to do it first of all. Now, I've got a couple of blobs here which I'm not that keen on, but let's see if I can get this effect to work. And as I say, there's not much paint on my brush, so this might take a little bit of experimenting. There we go, that's the sort of effect I'm looking for. I'm going to do that all around my painting, maybe in one or two spots in the middle as well. I think a bit more time lapse. So here it is, my finished painting. And I really like that last little step where I put those little soft ends on all my branches. It gives it that tree a little extra refinement. And I hope you will get a chance to make your own colour chart as well for all the various blacks that you can mix with what's in your paint box. It's certainly a bit of an eye-opener that you don't always need one that comes out of a tube. Now, if you've enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget you can like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a little comment down below because I always like to know what you're thinking, and if you've got any suggestions about future paintings, I'm always interested. If you want to go a little further to support the channel, there's a Buy Me a Coffee. The link is down in the description. You can go there, you can leave £1 or $2 or $1 or $2 in my coffee pot, or if you want to become a member to the channel, you can do that too, for just a couple of dollars as well. It'll help fund future tutorials. Now, I think it's time I put this painting to bed. Happy painting, people, and ooh, don't move. There's some more lovely videos coming right along for you. Happy painting.